Hey everybody, thanks for coming to the 1620 Life channel. Today I'm going to be answering a question I get basically every day. What is hemp? Well, let's dive right in. Well, for starters, hemp is part of the cannabis family of plants. That comes from the genus Cannabiceae. There's several plants that are flowering under that, one of which is cannabis. Another one is the humulus, which is better known as hops, which is used to make beer. So, yay to that. Um, there are three subspecies or species, depending on who you ask. But the species that are most commonly known were the Cannabis sativa, Cannabis indica, and Cannabis ruderalis, which is not really well known because the Cannabis sativa plant is the tall, lanky plant that you would see up to 15, 20 feet tall, even. A lot of the time, that's used for making hemp fiber and other products like paper and whatnot. Um, Whenever it comes to the flowering portion of the Cannabis sativa plant, that tends to be the more energetic, the more uplifting type thing. There's also the Cannabis indica plant, which is kind of known to give the effects of more slowed down or relaxing. Cannabis ruderalis plant is a little short, stocky plant, not really good for much. I'm sure some people use it for medicinal purposes, but it doesn't really flower the same as the Cannabis sativa and the Cannabis indica plant. Um, Really, there's not much of a difference between hemp and marijuana. People ask me that all the time. Is it two different plants? I used to be under the impression that it was two different plants, but it's really not. The genetics have gone so that it kind of is a different plant, but it isn't. If you laid marijuana and hemp next to each other, you would really have no idea which was which unless you did some lab testing. So really the history of hemp in the United States is pretty long. Goes back to, the old thing about George Washington used to grow marijuana up on Mount Vernon. Well, that's somewhat true, but not really. He doesn't really grow marijuana, which was made for medicinal and recreational purposes. They were cultivating hemp plants for fibers, for sails and ropes and things like that. Because at the time, George Washington was still part of a colony of Great Britain. Well, the British used all the rope and the sails and everything to put for their fleets to colonize and conquer and do all that good stuff. So um, he did indeed make some journal entries saying that he planted some cannabis plants in the muddy hole of Mount Vernon. It was a plot of land that they used in the far back. So they had a lot of success with that, and obviously he made plenty of money from that too. So um, fast forward to the 1930s, there was a couple of fine gentlemen by the name of Harry Anslinger and William Randolph Hearst that were the first ones to kind of help bring about a prohibition of cannabis in general. Anslinger was the head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, the first of its kind back in the 30s. He did not like cannabis, so he basically put a lot of legislation in there. One of the things being the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937. One of the things that helped him do this was Media Empire that was owned by William Randolph Hearst, which he had a lot of newspapers, which are planted on paper, and he had a lot of interest in the timber industry because of the paper and the manufacturing part of that. There was a story put out by a rival newspaper that talked about hemp as a fiber and how superior it was, and how the paper lasted longer, the fibers were stronger, and whatnot. So he didn't like that too much because it threatened his business. So he basically went on a media campaign, coined the name marijuana. That wasn't even a thing before he came up with it. Um, Basically, it had to do with Mexican immigrants and jazz musicians and everything. They used that to help outlaw it. It's kind of scare tactics, a lot of propaganda. But anyway, so with the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937, basically the point of that was to tax your cannabis plants. But the kicker to that was it basically made it illegal because you had to have a tax stamp to be able to possess marijuana. Well, the problem was is you had to take your marijuana to the capital and get your tax stamp. Well, if you were traveling with any cannabis plants, that was illegal if you didn't have a tax stamp. So it was kind of a chicken or the egg thing. So you kind of didn't get it. After that, that went for quite a while from 1937 to 1970, whenever Richard Nixon had the Controlled Substances Act. That basically put everything on a Schedule 1, Schedule 2 that everybody's familiar with. It put it in the Schedule 1 category, which is no benefit for medicinal purposes, which I think most of us know now is not really the case. So, um, the real difference between hemp and marijuana is just this legal distinction that came. Luckily, back in 2018, the game changed a little bit. There's been for quite a while still other countries like Canada that were cultivating hemp for industrial purposes, for fiber, resins, plastics, things like that. Um, so back in 2018, we had the Agricultural Improvement Act of 2018, that's commonly called the 2018 Farm Bill. In that, it basically differentiated hemp from marijuana and saying that if the cannabis plant has less than 0.3% of Delta 9 THC, then it's classified as hemp. Anything more than 0.3% Delta 9 THC is classified as marijuana. That's pretty much it. Um, Delta 9 THC is what people would refer to as regular THC. So if you're familiar with any legal states, Washington, Colorado, California, um, that is Delta 9 THC by chemical name. But we'll dig into that in a different video. Um, so basically, the 0.3% of the Delta 9 THC is it. Delta 9 THC is psychoactive. So if you're less than 0.3%, it's pretty obvious it's not going to be psychoactive. The 0.3%, even by the people that wrote the bill, kind of said that was an arbitrary number that they just picked. Um, Anything under 1%, which there is a total THC limit of 1%, that is because there's other forms of THC other than just Delta 9 THC. Um, Hemp uses specifically, again, we talked about the cannabis sativa plant. It's good for fibrous production. So there is quite a bit of fiber used for fabrics and things like that. Hemp seeds do have quite a bit of properties that are helpful, moisturizing, health food type things. People use them for skincare products. There are medicinal purposes that you would use them for in the health food world, similar to almonds or other nuts or whatnot. So um, the oil, however, that's made from the flowers or the bud, whatever we want to call it, that's going to be more of a medicinal thing. So anything that's produced from the hemp seed is not really regulated. The seeds themselves are, if they're sold for the purposes of cultivation, depending on what state you're in. But the hemp seed oil itself is basically unregulated. So any store that you see, any cosmetic store, any department store, pretty much can sell anything with a hemp seed product as long as there's not a content from a hemp flower or the bud. If it's produced from the hemp flower or the bud, it's generally much more potent as far as the medicinal effects go. Then you start introducing things like CBD. It does have some THC, CBD, CBC, CBN, CBG. We'll get into all that in a different video. There's over 140 known cannabinoids. So marijuana uses, however, being over 0.3%, which that again is a legal distinction, being over 0.3%, but you pretty much, if you get marijuana, you're not going to be caught dead with anything that's less than probably 10%, say. So the uses for marijuana, as everybody knows, there's medicinal purposes, there are recreational purposes. The hemp plant has a 120-day roughly grow cycle. Marijuana is going to have a 90-day grow cycle, so there's a little bit quicker cultivation time on it. it's a different thing to grow hemp as it is to marijuana. I'm sure people that grow marijuana tells you that that is harder. People that grow hemp say that is harder. In the legal world, sometimes it is more challenging because things can happen to make the THC levels rise pretty quickly in hemp. That's a problem because then you can't sell it. You would have to destroy your harvest. So with marijuana, I mean, it does have its intoxicating effects. There are plenty of medicinal effects that come from that. Whenever it comes to THC, there are quite a bit of analgesic effects. There are some psychological things that come from that too. So there are uses for both. The problem is that with marijuana, a lot of the time, since it's been cultivated to have such high levels of THC in the recent years, it can give people some anxiety. It can give people paranoia, the stereotypical things that you would think that would come with that. Hemp, not so much, depending on what the level of CBD is in it. It can be anti-psychoactive. So if you have a lot of issues with anxiety or depression or things like that, it does help pretty well with that too. Again, depending on your body chemistry and your tolerance. But in our next video, we'll do kind of a deep dive into the differences between CBD and THC because that's another question I get all the time. So we'll get into that, and be sure to like this channel and subscribe, and you'll get a notification whenever that new video comes out. And thanks for stopping by.